Happy New Year. Welcome to Soul San Francisco, Internationally Black, where we visit with black artists who are creating around the world. And today, our very special guest is Nambi E. Kelley, who you may know as the acclaimed playwright of Jazz, Native Son, and Extigony. But what you may not know is that Nambi also has an extensive international career. And today, we're going to go on a journey with her to South Korea, Singapore, and Tanzania. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy Soul San Francisco Internationally Black with Nambi E. Kelley. All right, so we are here with Nambi E. Kelley. Welcome to the show, Nambi. It's good to have you.
Hey,
Um,
everybody. Good to be had.
yeah.
And my name is pronounced Nambi.
Oh, Nambi.
Nambi.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
my apologies.
It's okay because I've
Nambi.
heard it pronounced differently different places, but
Yeah.
it's my parents chose to call me Nambi,
Nambi.
and Nambi was a goddess from
Us. Yeah.
East Africa who
Oh,
came down from heaven and started humanity. Well, she met a man
okay.
on Earth. That's she had to have a man. She met a man, Kintu, and then they populated the Earth. And so that's my name is a creation story.
All
All
right. Beautiful.
right.
Yeah.
Well, a
So I was
fitting name for
destined to be
yeah, for a
international,
creator.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's so
Destined.
appropriate.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Nambi.
Thank
Start off, I know that your international career began in Korea, if that's correct. And so I'd love to hear more about how you got connected to Korea and what you did when you were there.
Sure. How I got connected to South Korea was through an email. I used to be in this writers group. There's a writer in New York named Leon Gray, and he used to have this writers group in Los Angeles because I used to live in LA when I was in my 20s. And like he and the gentleman who ran this group, his name was Bill, and Bill would just always send emails to people like, oh, this is happening, that's happening, these people looking for jobs, that people looking for jobs. And it was at a time where email wasn't the way to get work. It was like, oh, you don't trust no email, right? But I was like, and so they sent us an email, and the email said, hey, come to Korea to for an arts camp, to work with a summer arts camp. And I was like, we international travel, I want to go. And so I emailed them, and there was this guy named Young, and he called my house at like 3 o'clock in the morning. He was like, hello, Nambi, we'd like you to come to Korea. And I was like, but my family was like, are you crazy? You're going to go all the way. You're going to get on a plane. They're really going to send you a plane ticket through email, right? You're going to go and get on a plane and go across the world and hang out. And I was like, yeah. But, I wasn't even questioning it until my family was like, hmm. And so the plane ticket came, and I got on a plane, and the whole time I was at the airport, I was like, is this real? Am I going to get to the other end of this flight and they're going to be like, take me hostage? Or, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I trusted. And so I got there, and they picked me up, and we had like a really, so the woman who I was supposed to shadow under, it was a language immersion arts camp for Korean children, and it was in the middle of I don't know where it was. It was outside of Seoul, and it was like this big, beautiful space, and there were all these children there, and there was one other black person whose name was Aku Kadogo, and Aku was in the original production of Color Girls, and they told me, I think she was Lady in Yellow, I think. And the reason why the artistic director was from New Zealand, and he told me later, he said, well, the reason, I wanted you to come, I saw your picture and you were black and she was black, and I want the black people to work together. That's what he told me. And at first I was offended. And then I was like, no, that's kind of cool. That's a good notion. All right. And so she and I worked together, and I was her assistant. So she was teaching dance classes. And I used to really be a dancer. Like, I don't dance anymore. I got my knees. But I used to really like perform that way. And so I was her assistant. And so we ran these classes for 2 weeks. And while I was there, um, with our kids arts camp, they're always trying to say, what other skills do you have so we can like, put on this show for these children and da 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 da. And so like I kind of had an attitude because secretly I really wanted to run the camp. you know. But that's because I'm first woman, Nambi, first woman goddess.
That's right.
And so and so this is literally what happened. We were under a theater, under we were on an outdoor stage, and people were like trying to figure out a song that everybody knew. Now these were artists from like Australia, me from the States, and Korean artists, and so they were like trying to figure out a song that everybody knew. And I was like, well, I don't know, I had a little attitude. And so they started singing some Beatles songs. Oh, I know the Beatles. I love the Beatles, 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 right? And so I started singing with them. The artistic director was on the other side of this field. It was a big open field, right? And he heard me singing, and he literally like stopped and he started beelining towards me, right? And I was like, oh God, what I do, what I do? And he was like, and he came to the edge of the stage. He's like, you come here. And I was like, okay. And he's like, you sing. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, how would you like to come back to South Korea and do a 6 month to a year tour singing? And I was like, yeah, yeah, okay. At the time, I was engaged to be
That
married.
attitude.
I was like, I don't know why I had such an attitude on this trip, but I had a real attitude. And I was like, well, I'm supposed to be getting married. And he was like, okay, well, we'll let you know. And so, if you want to come, that we're going to extend the invitation. I was like, these people, this is crazy. They sent me an email and I called me in the middle of the night. I get on a plane. I come to the other side of the world. We were supposed to be there initially for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then, oh, we're only going to be here a week. So my trip got cut short. I was like, this is crazy. You want me to come back? But of course, my relationship fell through. Here was me on my BlackBerry. I'm coming, right? And so that was how I got there. And so I went to South Korea. I had never been out the country for longer than the time I had just gone, which was for a week. And they were like, well, you're going to come for 6. I was like, I got a cat. I got a career. Can I bring my cat? They were like, oh, no, boo, you can't bring your cat. You could bring him if you want, but you're not going to see him again. Because it's like they have to quarantine the animal. I mean, I think they've changed it now, but then, and this was like the early 2000s, they were like, if you want to bring the cat, you got to quarantine him. So I left him in New York with my dad. But I got there and I was the only American. So it was a very small company of performing artists. There were 2 artists from Australia. The music director was from Australia. The artistic director was from New Zealand. And then the company of actors were from Seoul, the UK, and me from the States. And Australia. And so all of us, like, we did this show, and it was literally like new play development. Like,
yeah. Was it like a musical review, or what was the show?
The first show was called the 12 Animals, and and so it was based on the animals in the Chinese calendar, and so each of us took an animal, and then we made these CDs, and it was a whole lot of hard work. I had to learn to sing and rap in Korean. and also I had to sort of the show was like very high energy. Like and to this day, this is the hardest I ever had to work, because
they like early K-pop.
Right. And they didn't have like I was like, well, I'm equity. I need a break every hour and 20 minutes. They were like, oh no, we don't take breaks. Don't get no break. Equity. And so I was like, I at hour and 20 mark, I'd be looking at the clock, like, I'm gonna get my break, right? I'm gonna get no break. And so it was hard work. But I loved it because, first of all, it made me a better performer. I had to learn the language. I'm still very good friends with all of those people that I worked with. I mean, because we toured, and you know how that happens when you tour, and you get super tight. And, I thought I was a little bit, I was a little sadiddy because I got over there, and they were like, well, Nambi, we all share one hotel room. I was like, oh no. I'm gonna have my own room.
I'm equity.
I'm gonna have my own room.
The door that closes.
Right. And so I felt kind of bad about it because the Koreans, they would tour and they would all be sleeping in one room and, they share a floor. Cause I don't know if it's still the case, but when I was there, like the hotels, like you had the option, you could have a room with a Western style bed or you could have a pallet on the floor. And I actually learned to sleep on the floor and I still do. Actually, I love it because they heat their floors there. So because the floors are heated, it's like, oh, this is nice.
Oh yeah, sounds nice.
But it was great. And so I toured and we did 3 shows, and then they hired me as their curriculum director for part of that time. And so I was creating material to teach as well as performing, and that was really really fun. And it was a really great group of people, and it really matured me as an artist and as a woman,
Mhm.
and it broadened my perspective about um, just like everything that was possible in the world. And then the last thing I'll say about that, although there's so much more to say, is that what was really cool, the thing that I found, I was like, well, why do I feel so at home here? Like, I mean, I was like, okay, because it feels like soul feels like New York. It's like, but it wasn't about that, even though it does to me, like New York, it does. They're very similar, but it wasn't that. It was that the people that I met, the Korean artists that I met, and the Korean people that I met while I was touring, like they feel like black people, like because they've had their culture taken and stripped, and their names were taken with Japanese occupation, and the whole thing about comfort women and World War II, and just the history of not being able to be who you are and assert who you were. um I just there was a feeling like you get me and I get you,
Hmm.
Mhm.
that I was so like shocked. And I remember saying this to my friend Eugene. I said to her, I said, y'all are like black people. And she's like, oh, Nambi, you understand us. I said, yeah, because there's just this thing, like
Yeah.
we're oppressed. We've been oppressed and we get each other.
Hmm.
And there's great pride in being who we are. And I just, yeah, so
And you were there during the time of Katrina, right? And that was, speaking of being oppressed or just the, perceptions of Black people or relationship.
hmm
What was that experience like being in Korea, watching that happening, and being surrounded by Koreans who are observing this moment when we could see a lot of, Black Americans really being abandoned by their country?
really embarrassing. To be quite frank. And it was the tail end of my trip, because I literally was on my way back to the States when that happened. Like the tour had finished and I was packing, and then the news hit, right? But the whole time I was there was clouded with, what's wrong with your country? When I got off the plane, what's wrong with your country? Because George Bush is your president. Why did y'all elect him? And then while I was gone, he got reelected. And then when I came back to Korea after he had been reelected, the head of the president of the company, we had these group dinners, and he was like, so Nambi, what is wrong with your people? Why? And I was like, look, I voted for the right person. It didn't happen. I can't speak for the other. I don't know why this have happened. But so then that was like the whole energetic being there, like, ugh. And then when Katrina hit, I was like, oh my God. Right. And I just remember walking down the street in Gangnam, and like going to the store or something, and like people like looking at you, you
Mhm.
know, after that happened, like more so than before. And maybe it was just I was super sensitive to it. I don't know. But I remember this moment so clearly, that someone was staring at me and I was just like embarrassed, not to be black, but because I knew that they were contextualizing it in your own country. Is that why you're here? Because in your country they hate you,
Hmm.
Mhm.
But like the energy of it was like, it was not a good time to be overseas and to be American. And I can't even imagine what it must be like now. Oh my God. The whole time I was there, I did a lot of defending, because the other thing is too, and I don't know how much of this had to do with their perception of Black Americans. And when I say they, I mean like everybody. So the people from Australia, the people from New Zealand, like the entire company of people. Like, I don't know how much of their perception, because they know so much more about our political systems than we know about theirs, at least than I know. And there's an assumption that you don't know. And so I was like, well, I don't really know. But like people talking to you about what's happening in your country as if you do not know. That happened to me a lot. And
Hmm.
I was like,
Hmm.
hold up, boo. Trying to figure out, is that because I'm Black and American that you think I don't know what's going on in my
Hmm.
country? Or is it because I'm an American? Like, and
Hmm.
and to this day, I don't know what the distinction was. And I've never discussed it with my cohorts of my team members. I've never talked about it, but
Yeah.
I feel
um,
like Americans are seen as uninformed, and,
mhm,
and it has to do not Black. I think we might get even more credit because we're engaged in the
mhm.
political system in a more obvious way. But I found when I was traveling that white Americans, it was just assumed that they didn't know much about anything. Like, they'd be punked in the store counting change. People would be like, "You know
Wow.
what I gave you, right? Wake up."
Where?
Right.
There's a little bit of truth.
There's a little bit of truth, because I ain't gonna lie. I don't know. I know what I know, but I'm not well versed by any stretch. But I know what's going on here. At least.
Yeah. Were there other I know when we spoke earlier, you mentioned like Sex in the City was on TV then, and that was also creating certain perceptions of Americans. So yeah, maybe you can speak a little bit
Oh
about that,
yeah.
or just other sort of moments, I guess, of realizing, oh, I'm an American in a foreign country, and people think this about Americans.
Oh, sure. Yes. Like going to clubs. Like, like you be at a club and they be bumping Kanye, you know, and so, but the Korean men, um, just like, um, thinking that my perception, and I don't know how much of this, I mean, the Korean men coming up to you and, oh, you're American, so you're gonna have sex with them because they watch Sex in the City. And I remember like being at a club when I was there, and this guy was like, "Oh, American Sex in the City," like he said that to me, and I was like, "Oh, bye." Like, no, you're not getting me that way. But also like having an experience like them not believing you. So I had a moment. It was actually really scary, because the artistic director lived next door to us, and he was in back in Australia with his wife. And so me and another girl like, oh, we're gonna go to club, and she was from Sydney, and we went out clubbing to some place by ourselves, and some guy followed us home, and like was standing outside of our house, and we had to call the police. And then, but the police didn't speak English. I mean, like Seoul, Korean and English is like an official language there, but it doesn't mean that everybody is as fluent.
Mhm.
And I knew how to speak very basically, but I didn't have any kind of like, I couldn't have a conversation and say, hey, this man is following me. I didn't know how to do that. And so it was literally the middle of the night. We had to knock on the neighbor's door so they could talk to the police for us. And then the last thing that I want to share about, like, oh, this is what it's like being like, you're Black and this is very specific, is we were in a rehearsal, and um the whole premise of the 12 animal show was about this tree, right? And that we had to save the tree because the tree was dying. It was like a global warming play, actually, kind of in hindsight, um, before people were really talking about it. So the animals were fighting over who owned the tree, right? And so, they'd say, mine in Korean, which was like in Chinese, nega means over there. And in Korean, like it sounds similar. I don't know exactly how to spell it, but it sounds the same, like nega, 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 nega. So I was in rehearsal and everybody's like, nega, nega, nega. I was like, whoa. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I am really embarrassed to have to do this, but in my country, that is like you calling me, you know? And so they changed it for me. You know,
Oh,
at first, the artistic well, that's ridiculous, but but he was like, but I don't want you to feel like you being called on stage. And so he changed it. And so we changed it from nega to nekoya, which I guess means the same thing. So
mm,
instead, everybody was like, nekoya, 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 as
Mm.
opposed to nega. That same thing happened when we were in China. Um, that I was like, nega, nega. I was like, wait, they, they're not, I have had this experience before. They're not talking about us. That was like many years later, but
Yeah.
it's just so interesting, like how that changes
What
and
gets
how
lost?
it makes you feel, makes you
Yeah.
feel unsafe because you're unsafe in another land
mm.
when that word is used. But yeah.
New
Response.
ways to look at your own luggage.
Mm.
Mm.
Oh, that's good.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Look
Yeah.
at you. You got good titles. You got little one line zingers. Well,
That's.
well, well.
I need to go into the theater.
Come on into the theater.
You could be a star, kid. Nambi, do you still use any of that Korean rapping and um, language that you learned? Does that ever come up in your work or your life since then, or do they?
It doesn't come up in work necessarily, but it absolutely comes up in life. And that's the beauty of like living in places where there are so many different kinds of people.
Mm.
Mhm.
So, if I go to um, a hair shop, I mean, I'm gonna buy me some hair. Sometimes I add little pieces, and I'll speak to the shop owner, especially if I peep that they're Korean. Like if I hear them speaking Korean, I absolutely will speak to them in Korean. And
Yeah.
sometimes people are really like unfazed by it, which I prefer that they're not like, oh my god. But sometimes they're like wowed by it. And so that part is nice too. I did have an experience at a spa once, a Korean spa, which I discovered while I was in Seoul. When I was touring, I would always find a local spa and go hang out like on our off days. And but this was in Chicago. I was in a spa in Chicago, and the lady was rubbing me down, and I said something to her in Korean, and she turned to the woman next to her who was Korean, and she called me stupid in Korean.
Oh.
And I understood it, and I turned to her and I said, Babo. And she's like, oh, she was mortified that I understood her. But to cover it, she's like,
Mm.
and it was so funny. She was so embarrassed. And so she started asking me all these questions about where I was from and where I learned to speak. And was I mixed, race?
Right.
I spoke Korean and da 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 da. And then like when I left, she like smacked me on the butt. She's like, and then every time I saw her at the spa
We're
after that,
friends now.
yeah, I'm your chingu. Every time I see her after that, she'd be like, oh, she tried to smack me on the butt. It was hilarious. So it does come up, but not as often as I like. But I'm always amazed at how much I've retained. Um, and that sometimes I even think in it in Korean. Like if I'm in a rehearsal process, like because it was so rigorous that I might accidentally say something in Korean now. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And sometimes
Amazing.
because it's in context, like
Mm.
people understand what I'm saying, they don't question it. They'd be like, "Oh, okay." And so because I'll say it with the intention will be so clear, and then I'll wait a minute. I just said that in Korean. You understood me? And I'm like, "Oh yeah, because we were doing da 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 da." So they understood the context of it, but it was cool. And I
Wow.
think the best part about it was being able to introduce it to my mother when I came back from the states, from to the states, that, I'd be like, well, mommy, let's go get some Korean food. And she'd be like, oh, all right, Nambi. And we go and we get Korean food. And she'd be like, we're supposed to eat all of this. All of this is for us. And then they just keep bringing it. And she was like, she couldn't believe, my mother has so much fun. When I took her to get Korean food for the first time, it was, and so I was teaching her like little bits and pieces of how to say hello and goodbye, and you
Perfect.
know, and so I was trying to help her practice it so she could. It was fun. That was the wonderful part. That little bit that I retained to be able to share it with her.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah, a woman who
different
was,
language,
yeah.
extra words to use is always fun.
And like someone like her, like she was raised on the west side of Chicago. She didn't she wouldn't ever have that kind of experience if I hadn't had it. And so it was really beautiful to bring able to bring that to her.
Because I would think there is some black presence. Did you find any black presence there? Uh, People who had grown up in Korea who were black.
I didn't, cuz my circle was super small.
Hmm.
Um but it absolutely was there.
Yeah,
Cuz there's a army base there and a DMZ,
yeah.
and there's lots of soldiers presence there. So people, like in Seoul, like it wasn't necessarily uncommon. Like people would always assume I was either a teacher or military because if I went somewhere by myself or took the train somewhere. And but when we went into the country, because we toured the entire country, so it wasn't just we were in the major city, we were in the teeny tiny like towns as well, like Daegu and Jeju-do, and a couple other places. And so like you would go down there, and I remember, I think I told y'all this, that we went down to, I want to say it was in Daegu. Um, this woman came up to me and she did this
Hmm.
old woman to like rub my skin, because a lot of them, I imagine, hadn't seen a black person in person
Wow.
before. And I think I had told y'all too, I had an experience of being at a party, and like I used to have long dreads like down to my butt when I was there. And so it was not uncommon. I mean, it happened in the States too, because that's just being black. But like in Korea, like my hair was like a magnet for hands. Like I'd be in the grocery store and and I'd be like, hey. And the first the question they would ask me, they say in Korean, they say, is it real? And I'd be like, yes, it's real. And they'd be like, and then they like touch you. I was in a party once. This woman started touching my breast and touching my butt. She wasn't drunk. It was just like, oh, ondongi isoyo, which means you have a lot of butt. It's like, oh, I was like, oh yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if it's the same now because
We
this
need
was
to move there.
out, right, because it was just like,
We need more of us over there, right? I was just curious because I'm amazed still that there are places, even when you were there after the wars, that people wouldn't assume that you might be a black Korean or someone who was raised there on the base or something. Um,
it
that there.
happened here more than there
Hmm.
when I came back.
Hmm. Oh yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
not so much there. But when I got to Korea, I do remember there was like this big craze of like Koreans were like perming their hair to make it look like an afro.
Hmm.
And so like you would see like, yeah, so you would see like ladies walking down the street, young girls, and they'd have like their hair would look like mine, but like
Whoa,
straight, but like froed out. I was like, oh.
wow.
Yeah. So I have no idea though what it is now. I haven't been there in a long time. It feels like just yesterday, but it was just yesterday ago.
I wanted to get to Singapore because that was also a big
Yeah.
project or a big another big international experience of yours. So yes, after Korea, yeah, you kept going, I guess, international. And can you
Yeah,
talk a little bit about what you did in Singapore and how that all came about? And
sure. I went from Asia, I went from Korea to Africa, and then I kind of was done for a little bit, and that was based on being inspired by my time there. I said I can go do this for Black people. So then I went to Tanzania, and then I went from Tanzania back home, and then I kind of just um, kind of stayed put for a little bit, but then I kind of got this bug um, to travel again internationally, and I did. La Mama has a international retreat in Spoleto, in Italy, and it's so beautiful. And I've done it twice, and I actually was blessed to meet Ellen Stewart, who was the founder of La Mama way back in the day. It was like the last year of her life, and
Mm.
she was from my grandmother is from Louisiana, and so was she. And so like she literally just held court. She was so sick, but she was there, and she just like I'm gonna sit outside, and literally people sat at her feet, and it was so amazing and beautiful. And that was the first time I went, and then the second time I was like, I'm gonna go back, and so I went because Lynn Nottage was she was running it, and I really wanted to spend some time with her. I had been in her one of her shows, and I knew her, and so I thought this would be fun. And so I was there, and there was a group of artists there who were from Singapore. Um, Chong Chin, who's the artistic director of the Finger Players in Singapore, and it was a great group of people. My roommate was also from Singapore, and I just felt like, oh, I just love these people. They're just so great, and so we had a great time, and that was it. I came back to the States, and literally, probably about 2 months later, I had a dream that I had gotten a call from Chong Chin asking me if I wanted to travel. And do you know the next day there was an email in my inbox from him saying, "Oh, there's a project that we want to build and we're looking for funding from the Singaporean government. Are you interested?" I was like, I just had this dream. Was I
Yeah.
asleep?
Oh.
Did I read this and go back to sleep? But I had dreamt it. And so it was crazy. And so I was like, I just had this dream. But then he's like, yeah. But are you interested? I was like, yes, if you get the funding. But you know how it is when you're an artist. It's like, well, you get the funding, let me know. You call me back. I'm going to keep moving. And so I got to pay my rent. And so I kept
Mhm.
moving. And then a couple of weeks later, or maybe I don't remember how long, maybe a month or so later, he emailed me and he said, "We got the money." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah." So so this project, our plan is to do an adaptation of the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and we want to travel to Tibet and spend a little time in China and study with a monk. And then we're gonna do it in Singapore. And I was like, really? And he's like, yep. And that's exactly what happened. And so even like the first um so we did this project over about 2 years. And it's funny because just last week, um we were in touch, and it was like, we should revive the project, because the project was all about like past lives and how we've all been connected since the beginning of time, and that culture is the specific of how it manifests. But but the, but we all live and die the same, and we grieve the same, and we live the same. And so it was really like, to this day, it's probably one of my most favorite projects, because I was in it as a writer and I was in it as a performer. And so we went to just outside of Tibet. And
Yeah.
so, but we studied with a monk for like 3 weeks at a monastery. And so there were the Singaporean artists, and then there was an artist from Italy, and then me. And so the crazy thing was, the Singaporeans didn't speak Tibetan, but they did speak Chinese. Some of them spoke Chinese, and so it was literally that there was a translator, that the monk would talk, and then the translator would translate it to Chinese, and then somebody would translate it from one of the company members would translate it from Chinese to English. So by the time I got the information, the monk had moved on to other deeper life lessons.
Playing telephone.
Yeah.
When you say you study with the monk, what were the so were you was there a particular area of Tibetan Buddhism that you were like focusing on, or was it just like the daily routine of being a monk in a monastery that you were going through?
I would say it was all of it. And the thing that I remember most about that time was, at the end, he basically talked about, I think,
From what I could gather.
from what I could,
Telephone.
um but like there was the at the very end, he said, I was told he said that he wanted to give each of us a gift. And so and there was this real beautiful intentionality
Mhm.
behind the gift giving. And so like, and I still have the gift he gave, but like this ain't it, but pretend like this is it. And so like he would look at you, and then he would take like this scroll and he would roll it up while he was thinking about you.
Mm.
And then if he got distracted in any way, he would stop and he would start over, and then he would present it to you. It was so beautiful. Like the intentionality with which he gave was just
Mhm.
beautiful. um the funny thing to me was that like he had a little, he had his robe or whatever they're called, and all you hear this buzzing. You're like, what's going on? He pulled a cell phone out of his little robe, and he's like hello, however you say hello in Chinese. Was so funny. I was just like, what is going on here? But the intentionality, and I never forgot that. Like, and to this day, like when I give gifts to people, like I think about that. Am I taking my time when I'm wrapping the paper? Am I thinking about them? Am I pouring intentional love into this person and into this person's life and well wishes? Or I'm just trying to get it done because it's Christmas Eve and I got other things to do. And
Right.
that the intentionality of what you give will transform the person you give it to and the giver. It was just so beautiful to watch. That's the thing that I remember most about that time.
Wow.
Um, yeah, it was really remarkable. And then we went, so after that, then we went away and we wrote. And then a couple months later, they flew us all to Singapore, and we stayed in Singapore for I think 3 weeks or a month. And it was just workshop. I was like, what? We just gonna work? The government is paying us very well to
Mhm.
just workshop for a month? What planet is this? And how did I get to be so lucky?
Yeah.
And it was just really cool. It was just beautiful. And so then from there, the main divisor Chong Chen, he's just absolutely brilliant. He's one of the most brilliant visionary people I've ever worked with in my life.
Mhm.
And till I die, I'm gonna try and get something for him to get his eyes, as he's just a visionary. But then he went away with all of the stuff we wrote in our experiences, and then he kind of created a piece, and then we performed the piece. Then we flew back to Singapore however long later, and we spent 2 months there, like a month and a half rehearsing it, and then did a 2-week performance run at the Singapore Arts Festival, um, and which was really cool. I mean, those artists, just phenomenal, phenomenal, brilliant, brilliant people. And it's one of my favorite projects that I've ever done in my whole life, because it married everything I care about, which is the oneness of everybody, international work, and talking about it just was beautiful. It was just beautiful. Like we created the birth of the universe on stage
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
like lights,
Yeah.
and like to this day, like I just how did you see that,
Yeah.
but great, 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 great people. And so then they published what we wrote,
Okay.
and so it exists in Singapore somewhere.
Oh,
And then
is there an English translation somewhere, or is it only in?
yeah, it's in English, I believe.
Okay.
I've never
Okay.
actually seen it, but I
Oh,
believe
great.
it is.
Name of the project.
What did we end up calling it? The Book of Living and Dying. I was like, that's so
Okay.
like, but that was I had no say. I was like, well, can't we call it entanglement or something? Of course, now entanglement means something completely different, thanks
Wow.
to Jada Pinkett Smith. But yeah, but the Book of Living and Dying is the name of it. And
That's a good name. I think that's needed. We need a book of living and
Mm.
dying.
Uh,
To speak to that, I was just kind of curious too about the connection of these experiences to your work. And a question I had was when you started working on the Singaporean project as a writer, had you written plays in the States at that point? You had like where in your writing, your playwriting career? Because I know you're an actor. I think you as a playwright is just huge and magnificent right now too. So I'm just
Thank you.
curious as to that, how that played in this trajectory that you've had, of being a really dynamic playwright and successful playwright.
Thank you. I received that.
Yeah.
I'm always at the beginning, you know.
Hmm.
Uh, I
I
think
love that.
it was in alignment, because at that point, I mean, my undergraduate degree is in playwriting,
Okay.
and I was produced as a playwright before I left college. I had my first production. It did really well and did everything. So I would always have like a play done a year as a production. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was primarily making my living as an actress, really until Native Son kind of hit. And then like I had to shift because all of a sudden people are like throwing money at me to do this thing. And I got to pay my rent. So, so I do miss it. But in terms of um when the Korean project came up, like it really was about, it was more about my soul, no pun intended. Although look at God, right? Because but it really was about my spirit, that I was broken from that relationship ending or leaving the person I was going to marry, and I just needed some time to nurture myself. So I wasn't even thinking about art.
Uh,
Like I just needed to get out of the country. I need to get away from everybody who knew me when and who knew him then, and
mm,
just start over. And so I spent a lot of the first year I was there, I was just really depressed, like to be quite transparent. And I didn't think about writing or any of that outside of, okay, I'm going to go to rehearsal now. Okay, I'm learning these lines. I'm a cow. Okay, you know what I mean? Now I'm a dragon. You know what I mean?
mm,
And then once I started to heal, literally put the pieces of my soul back together from the love that that community unknowingly poured into me. Then I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna write. And so I started listening to a lot of NPR. And there was a story I'd heard about a family, at the time, like Chicago. I'm sorry, because I was raised in Chicago, and the housing projects were all being torn down. And there was a whole story about it. And I was like, ooh, that's a play. I started writing a play, just because it was in my heart to do it, not because I was trying to do anything. And then at the same time, just before I had left the States, I had done a production of Antigone at South Coast Rep in California. And I had an idea. I was like, you know what? I could make this black. you know? And so that was, so I was, so while, so then the second year I was in Seoul, I really started doing more writing. And that was the first time I had taken on the idea of adaptation. And
mm,
so I was like, yeah, it's a hip hop this. And the artistic director of the theater, whose name was Roger Wren, Roger said to me, he said, but yeah, that's just such a limited understanding of music. He said, what if it is more reflective of the experience you're having right now, which is all of these different influences? And it sort of blew my mind
mm,
about Black being more than the box. You know what I mean? Like a white man telling me this was like, you're more than that, boo.
yeah.
And because he was my friend, he's passed away now, but it was because he was my friend and because he loved me that he challenged me to be bigger than the box. And that was how Extigony was born. My very first drafts of it. And so when I got to Singapore, by the time I got to Singapore, um, um, Extigony had already started, making the rounds and having productions here and there, and other work was being done. And the play that I had written about the family being displaced from housing projects in Chicago had also had a production. I had since lost my mother, so like I shifted as a human being in terms of everything that mattered to me to be real, right? And so when Singapore came up, like I already had experience in adaptation, but and here's God again, right? Because that project was also about my healing. And I didn't know that. I thought, oh, I'm just going to go out the country and I'm this Black girl. Reading the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying was instrumental in my healing of my grief of losing my mom.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first read the book, I couldn't get through it without crying. And it was like, and thinking back to it, like I had dreamt it,
Mm.
right? I dreamt it, and then it appeared, and then it was exactly what I needed to get to the other side of whatever. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes. I'm so convinced that dreams, I have, that's part of my solo show. I say I dream of places before I get there. And people always laugh, and I always say, no, no, I'm serious, right? Because I've had that experience too of dreaming things that happen in the future. And I'm there. And when I'm there, I go, wait a minute, I dreamed this, right? So I'm with you, girl. I believe you.
We absolutely cousins.
Believer.
You know we cousins.
You
Cause
know we are.
we're cousins. Yeah, but that project was, it was bomb,
Yeah.
literally.
This is a good, like, to me, this is when people say take life by the balls, that phrase, take life by the balls. And here, I'm hearing in these moments, which are huge in your life, where there's a crossroads there, SU is at work with you, girl. And instead of, you could go in and heal yourself by shutting the door, turning the music up, getting a cup of coffee and turning in. And instead, you've created these huge moments for yourself, bringing your ancestors with you, that just, that to me, that's what that phrase means. Like, you need to grab life by the balls.
Hmm.
You don't retreat from that moment. You live more into yourself at that moment. That's
Yes.
a beautiful, beautiful thing.
And the funny thing about the play, like the pieces that I had written, like, because as I said, Chong Chin, he took all we wrote and he basically built a story around, the bits and pieces and our experiences. But it was a completely original story. But it was about a transvestite Italian born mother and a black girl from Chicago who who he adopted me. The transvestite adopted me, but we had been connected since from the beginning of time. And that it was no accident that we had met in this earthly plane in this particular moment. And so the whole play was the unraveling of that connection.
Wow.
And so the gift that Chong Chen gave to me was the loss that I was feeling. She ain't gone.
Mm.
And that's probably why I felt like so loved in that artistic space, is because he brought my mother back to me when I thought she was gone. And he was like, no, the story is she's always been there. She's here now, and she always will be. And so will you.
Mm.
And as people of color, we're not, we talk about that, but I don't know that we feel that we belong, you know? I
Mm.
know I speak for myself. I know that I don't. I know that I, like, sometimes I'll feel my heart racing and my blood pressure like up here, because I'm like, this moment where I'm supposed to be in this space is so temporary. And it's like, no, boo, you were here from the beginning of time. They came from you. Your name is Nambi. What?
Mm.
Right? Like, my life has been the process of relearning that wherever I go.
Yeah. We need to backtrack and pick up Tanzania a little
I was about
bit.
to, yeah, just let's say.
I've got the background.
See,
I'm
yeah,
ready
you want to
for
lead this, you want to
I'm ready for the
ask
African
about it, you want to lead this line of
connection.
question.
I can do this with my people.
Hey.
How'd that work out?
Um, with all the best intentions, it worked out beautifully, I'm gonna say. The thing that I thought I went to do, I wound up coming back with something else.
Hmm.
So when I was in Seoul, and I was like, well, I can go do this for Black people. I said, well, how you gonna do that, Nambi? Since now you talking big game, now you done been healed, from your relationship ending. What you gonna do? And so somebody randomly from high school said to me that a girl I used to run track with in high school, I used to compete, that she lived in Tanzania. I said, oh, I'm gonna email her. So I sent her an email, and she wrote back. And I was like,
Rabbit for life.
yes. And she's like, what do you want to do? I said, I want to do theater in Tanzania with, I would work with black people. She's not black, but she's like, I was like, how can you help? And she was like, I'll set it up. And so she put me in touch with a woman named Dr. Vera. I don't remember her last name, but she was like the gatekeeper, and she was this German woman. And anyway,
we have we haven't got to nobody black yet.
right, right. Well, long story short, um, I found a way to get there. I enrolled the music director who worked in with us in Seoul, so he was coming. He was from Australia, and then so he and I. The intention was we were going to go there to sort of lay the groundwork so that we could come back and bring a theater company I was involved with in Chicago called Impact, which is the Ma'at Production Association of African Centered Theater. And so I was trying to always do it through that company and bring a whole contingent of artists over who were of color but have international component to it. And so what happened was we got there, and then we went to Pangani, and we were part of this festival, um, which was really like phenomenal. Like it was this 3 day long festival of just, everybody in the community coming together and doing arts. And it was really, really quite beautiful. And then we did a workshop with a theater company there called Anganenge. And, and I can't even remember how long we were there, maybe like 3 weeks. But so we did this workshop with some of the artists there, and it was really, really fun and great. And I say it was successful because when I came back, my mother looked at me and she said, "You look different." Hi, Beatty. She said, "You look different." She said, "What happened over there? You look different." But what she was saying, what I remember feeling when she said that was that something in me had been answered, like because the part of the trip that I feel like transformed me was that we weren't on like these tourist safaris with hordes of white people. Like we were able to go into these communities and talk to the people who live there and hear and let them know that we see them, and that we hear them, and that let them see us. And it because I mean and they were so like this tiny little community of Pangani. Like people had nothing, right? But they would open the door to us and offer half of what they had. And but they're like, "But you're American and you have way more than us." And I just was really, it deeply moved me, um that people could be so loving and so generous to a complete stranger. And it taught me that for all my Western everything, I don't have nothing if I don't have that. Like
Mm.
these people are way richer than I'll ever be if I don't learn that about. But it was really quite beautiful. And then the highlight for me was, um, we looked around and we were like, ain't nobody around. Cause I hired a videographer. So there was me and a couple of black girls, and then the white girl that was with us who had set it up. And we like drove to the middle of, I don't remember where we were, and there was no one around. We just took off all our clothes. I had these long, beautiful dreads. We took off all our clothes, and we totally went skinny dipping in the Indian Ocean, and it was
Yeah.
amazing and wonderful. Like to just be in that water, like it was like being in a bath. And for me, like there was a reclaiming of the ocean,
Mm.
because the ocean is so complicated for our people. It's complicated space.
Hmm.
And so to reclaim it for myself as a place of renewal, was really quite amazing. And all the salt being in my dreads when I came back home. And so when my mother said you look different, like I knew what she meant. And all of those artists we kept in touch with, and we're still friends with them. And this was the early 2000s, so we're all still in each other's lives. Somebody named their baby after me.
Wow.
It was great. And you know I was gonna say something, but I can't remember. Oh, so it didn't, so we never raised the money to go back. to that community. And I felt really bad about that because one of the things they said is like Americans will tell us we have so much money. There's so much money being filtered into these small communities. Nobody ever sees the money. The black people, the only people we hear about are Oprah and some big basketball player, but nobody ever comes back. That's what they told us. They said in black Americans, regular black Americans, they don't come, we don't even know who they are. They don't know us. And then this whole conversation with some of the people who lived in the village about um, that you don't know who you are because y'all ignore us. Like having very candid conversations about that was just it's just really kind of it's just mind blowing. But so we never raised the money. I was in over my head. I was too young. I had this big dream, but I didn't know how to put the pieces together in order to realize it. And it doesn't mean that it won't happen at some point um, in my career, but I was in over my head and I was leading completely with my heart. And sometimes when you do that, it just unfolds. But in this instance, it was heart coupled with a little bit more ego. It was like I can do that. No, boo, you don't know what you don't know, and that's why we didn't raise the money. I probably raised like 5 grand, but it wasn't enough for the vision, and I could have made the vision smaller. But I didn't want to sacrifice the thing that I promised to these people.
Mm.
But I couldn't do it. Um, but that's a thought, huh?
It's not too late.
It's not too late, and
I
now
remember,
that's
Chris,
good. Thank
this
you.
that vibration is really huge.
Mm,
It can
mm-hmm.
be overwhelming sometimes, I think, to meet the world as an American and to have all these resources that people really squander and take for granted a lot of times over here, or to have the resources that are just beyond your reach.
Hmm.
Can't get
Mm-hmm.
to them. Maybe Oscar Eustace could go over there and build a big old thing, but he doesn't have that heart connection. And so I think that's a struggle that in the future, I hope we figure out ways to continue to nurture our desire to be of use to our people, like to Africa and even other parts of the world where because our light shines as Black Americans, Black people in general, but the mythology around Black Americans and people far and wide knowing the Tupac and knowing those stories and connecting us always to this larger idea of who we are.
Mm.
I think there's a hopefully a responsibility we can meet. As an artist, I have that desire too. Like, what is my connection, and how can I be more connected? What is my community? How can it not be this tiny, small, like limited view that I find myself not in, right? Not always in.
Right, right, right. I love that. I love how you articulated that. And I'm so grateful for this conversation because, even in pandemic times, you're running the rat race and trying to look after you. And I think what's so brilliant about this moment is if you don't look at it in the context of all,
Mm,
you're failing, you're limiting yourself because this is a global situation, it's a global moment. And I'm grateful for I'm terribly terribly distraught about the catastrophic loss of life.
yeah,
But I'm so grateful for the ever continuing lesson, the unfolding of the oneness of us,
Mm,
yes,
you know
yeah,
um
yeah.
yeah.
yeah. There's growth in this. There's these sacrifices. I feel like the engagement. Everybody, you want to talk about woke? People are going, what? What? Eyes is opening and clouds are forming and rain is falling and cleansing. And I just think all of it, I welcome it. This the day that God made, honey.
Amen.
This
Amen.
is
I mean, I say
mm,
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, a good place to end. I think that's
we've been around the world,
beautiful close.
Nabi. You took us on
Yeah.
a sure. So before we leave, tell us where we can find you, what you got coming up. How can we see that star shine?
Oh wow. I got a couple of buns in the oven, writing projects at various states of development. Um, I guess the thing that's already been publicized is I'm writing a Maya Angelou play. I'm working with her estate. So it's so funny that you mentioned that earlier,
Yeah.
because Mrs. Flowers is in the play.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah, but they're intending to take it to Broadway when everything is said and done, and I actually do my rewrites. So that's kind of the biggest thing that's happening. I'm also doing some writing for television. So I just wrapped a writer's room on a new show that's based on Lawrence Otis Graham's one of his books. And so well, it's not based on the book, but the it's sort of based on it. It's loosely based on the book. And so doing that, and
Which book is it?
it's called Our Kind of People.
Yes.
Yeah, and so yeah, that book. So yeah,
Ooh.
so yeah. Well, because people have different feelings about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So they thought it was a series. So I was writing
That's
on that.
great. Oh, I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, and it's a black soap. So
Yes,
it's
it is.
soapy. It's soapy.
Oh, that's great. I love
Yeah.
that. I'm
And
I'm
so
there.
yeah, and I think the other thing I'll share is I am wearing a little bit of a producer hat for a play I wrote. So when George Floyd was murdered, a lot of young audience theaters, like we're interested in talking to me about a play that I had written, and so I produced a digital series of it. So it's like 4 episodes, and it's about to start a digital tour in like 2 weeks in Black History Month. Ooh.
Yeah. That's
So
cool.
it's basically about a young boy on the south side of Chicago, a young black boy who's afraid to leave the house because he had an encounter with the police. And
Yeah.
so it's designed to empower our people to be fearless. And so his father becomes Barack Obama, and they travel in time to meet children from the civil rights era who conquered their fears to change the world. And
Mm.
so the young boy then meets a 7-year-old Barack Obama on the eve of the assassination of Dr. King. And it becomes his job to teach a young Barack to be fearless so that then Barack goes on to be president.
Like, where are some of the, if people wanted to watch it when it starts in 2 weeks, is there somewhere that they can find some of the scheduled performances?
Look at you. Oh, thank you. There's a website. There's a website. Right now, it's only being booked into schools and community
Okay.
centers.
Okay.
So if you want to book the show, you can go to Holden and Arts, HOLDENARTES.com, I think, or Jabari Dreams of Freedom, which is the name of the play. We have a website that'll connect you to the booking agent. It's Jabari Dreams of Freedom, JABARI of freedom.com. And there's a
That's
trailer on the website and the booking information and all of that. And
Mm,
this has been amazing.
yeah.
thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. I'm
Thank you
excited.
for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of So Soul San Francisco Internationally Black. Join us next month on February 20th for another journey in international blackness. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay beautiful. Goodbye.